The sound of hushed voices drifted up from the garden, carrying fragments of a conversation I was never meant to hear. I stood frozen at my bedroom window, my camera forgotten in my hands, as my son's words shattered the peaceful morning. Mom's getting older, Lorelai. We need to think about what's best for her future. My name is Valeria, and at 63, I never expected to become a problem that needed solving, especially not by my own flesh and blood. I'd welcomed Elijah and his wife into my estate 6 months ago, thinking it would bring us closer as a family. Now, watching them huddled together on my prized rose garden bench, the same bench where I'd nursed Elijah through countless skinned knees and broken hearts, I realized how naive I'd been. Your mother's just set in her ways. Lorelai's voice carried clearly through the morning air. My mom would be much more adaptable. The Sunset Valley retirement community has excellent reviews, and the rest of her words faded into white noise as my fingers tightened around my camera. 30 years of capturing human nature through my lens had taught me to recognize a coup in progress. Valeria? A knock at my door made me jump. Are you ready for breakfast? I quickly composed myself, setting my camera down. Coming, Lorelai. The breakfast table had become our daily battlefield, though you'd never know it from the pleasant smile Lorelai wore as she poured coffee. Elijah sat absorbed in his phone, barely looking up as I took my seat. I made your favorite scones, Lorelai announced, sliding a plate toward me. The ones with lavender, just like you taught me. I took a bite, noting how she'd altered my recipe. Too sweet, as always. Thank you, dear. They're interesting. Mom, Elijah finally looked up. We've been thinking about the East Wing renovation. I cut in, watching their expressions carefully. I was actually considering converting it into a photography studio. Share my craft with the community. Lorelai's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. But we discussed using that space for your mother, yes. I smiled, meeting her startled gaze. I heard you both in the garden earlier. The silence that followed was delicious. Elijah's face flushed red. He'd always been terrible at confrontation, just like his father. Mom, we were going to talk to you about this properly, he stammered. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me? I set down my napkin. I've traveled to 47 countries, documented 3 revolutions, and raised you alone after your father passed. Now you think I need managing? That's not what Lorelai started. My late husband built this estate from nothing. I continued, my voice steady. Every brick, every rosebush, every memory here was earned. And you think you can simply replace me? Mom, please. Elijah reached for my hand, but I pulled away. No, let's be honest for once. I stood, looking between them. You see an aging widow with a valuable estate? I see my son, who I thought I raised better, plotting with his wife to shuffle me off to Sunset Valley while they play house with her mother. That's not fair, Lorelai protested, but her voice wavered. Life rarely is, dear. I picked up my coffee cup. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some calls to make. About the East Wing, of course. As I left the dining room, I heard Elijah call after me, but I didn't turn back. In my study, I sank into my leather chair, surrounded by photographs from my travels. Warriors in Papua New Guinea, monks in Tibet, revolutionaries in South America. All had taught me something about power, respect, and survival. My fingers traced the edge of a particular photo. Me standing proud atop Machu Picchu, camera in hand, the world at my feet. That woman hadn't let anything defeat her, and neither would I. I reached for my phone, scrolling to a number I hadn't called in years. My old friend Heidi would know exactly what to do. She'd always said I was too soft with Elijah, too willing to give without demanding respect in return. As the phone rang, I glanced at the garden where my son and his wife still sat, probably damage controlling their failed coup. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Heidi, it's Valeria. Remember that favor you owe me from Marrakesh? I smiled as I watched Elijah and Lorelai through the window. I think it's time to cash it in. You want me to do what? Heidi's laughter echoed through the small cafe where we'd arranged to meet. Pretend to be a mysterious buyer interested in your estate? Valeria, you've finally lost it. I stirred my espresso, watching the foam swirl. Not you specifically, but I need someone to create pressure. And this is about teaching your son and that wife of his a lesson? Heidi leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with the same mischief I remembered from our college days. Count me in, but we'll need help. That's how I found myself sitting across from Freddie, a real estate agent Heidi knew, 3 hours later. His office screamed success. All glass and chrome with a view of the city that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Let me get this straight, Freddie said, tapping his pen against his desk. You want me to represent a mysterious international buyer who's interested in your estate? And create some complications for your son and daughter-in-law? Exactly. I pulled out an envelope. Here's the first payment. There will be more. Freddie whistled as he counted the cash. This is serious money, Valeria. Are you sure you want to go through with this? They're planning to ship me off to a retirement home, I replied flatly. What would you do? He nodded slowly. Fair point, but we need to make this believable. Real estate transactions have paper trails. That's where I come in, Heidi interjected, pulling out her laptop. I've set up a shell company. Everything will look legitimate. As they discussed details, my phone buzzed. A text from Elijah. Mom, can we talk? About this morning? I typed back. Having lunch with friends. We'll talk later. Your son? Freddie asked, noting my expression. He's trying to smooth things over. I put the phone away. He always does this. Acts first, thinks later, then expects me to forgive and forget. Well, Freddie grinned. He's about to learn actions have consequences. I'll make the first contact tomorrow. How much pressure do you want me to apply? Enough to make them sweat, I said. But nothing illegal. I want them to feel what it's like to lose control of their home. Just like they're planning for me. Heidi touched my arm. And what about you? What will you do while this plays out? I pulled out a worn travel journal. Remember our trip to Nepal? The monastery where we stayed? The one where you took that amazing photo of the sunrise? Heidi's eyes widened. You're not thinking of a year-long spiritual retreat, I announced. It's perfect. I'll be unreachable except for emergencies, while Freddie here creates havoc with property taxes, zoning laws, and a very persistent potential buyer. Freddie whistled again. That's actually brilliant. They can't move Lorelei's mother in if they're worried about losing the house entirely. And you'll document everything? I asked Heidi. She patted her laptop. Every email, every phone call, every panicked reaction. You'll have front row seats to the whole show. As if on cue, my phone rang. Lorelei's number flashed on the screen. Perfect timing, I murmured, answering the call. Hello? Valeria, I hope I'm not interrupting. Lorelei's voice dripped honey. About this morning, we really should discuss things as a family. I caught Heidi's eye and winked. Actually, I'm glad you called. I just got some interesting news about the estate. The estate? Her voice sharpened instantly. Yes, apparently there's been an inquiry. Something about international investors. I paused for effect. But we can discuss that later. You wanted to talk about this morning? The silence on the other end was telling. I could practically hear her mind racing, calculating. Yes, but maybe we should wait until you're home, she stammered. When will you be back? Oh, I'm not sure. I have a few more meetings. I smiled at Freddie, who was already drafting the first official inquiry letter. Don't worry about dinner. After hanging up, I sat back, feeling lighter than I had in months. And so it begins. You're scary when you're plotting revenge, Heidi observed, but she was smiling. Remind me never to cross you. It's not revenge, I corrected her, pulling out my old camera. It's a lesson in respect and consequences. Speaking of which, I snapped a quick photo of Freddie at his desk. Would you mind if I document this journey? The photographer emerges. Heidi laughed. Just like old times. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Elijah. Mom, Lorelai says someone's interested in buying the estate. What's going on? I showed the message to Freddie and Heidi. Should I respond? Let him stew, Freddie advised, sealing the official inquiry letter. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. As I left the office, I felt a familiar thrill, the same one I used to get before embarking on a challenging photo assignment. But this time, instead of capturing other people's stories, I was finally taking control of my own. I waited until dinner to drop my bombshell. The tension around the table was already thick enough to cut with a knife. Elijah had been checking his phone obsessively since Freddie's letter arrived, and Lorelai kept shooting me nervous glances over her untouched salmon. I've been doing some thinking, I announced, setting down my fork, about what you said regarding my future. Lorelai perked up immediately. Oh? We'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going on a retreat, I said, watching their faces carefully. For a year. Elijah choked on his wine. A year? Mom, you can't be serious. I'm perfectly serious. I pulled out a brochure I'd prepared with Heidi. The Golden Path Monastery. They have a wonderful program for spiritual seekers my age. But Lorelai's voice wavered. What about the estate? The buyer who's interested. Oh, you can handle that, I said breezily. I'll give you power of attorney while I'm gone. Limited, of course. The color drained from Lorelai's face. Limited? You can manage the day-to-day affairs, but no major decisions. I took a sip of wine. No sales, no significant changes to the property. I wouldn't want to come back to find everything different. Elijah pushed his plate away. Mom, this is crazy. You can't just disappear for a year. Why not? I spent 3 months photographing tribal ceremonies in Papua New Guinea when you were in college. Remember? That was different. I was young and now I'm old? I raised an eyebrow. Too old to make my own decisions? The silence that followed was deafening. Lorelai's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down. She cleared her throat. When would you leave? Next week. I watched her eyes widen. I've already booked my flights. Next week? Elijah stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. This is insane. What about the property taxes that just came in? And this mysterious buyer who keeps calling? I shrugged. Like I said, you'll have limited power of attorney. You can handle it. Handle it? His voice rose. Mom, they're saying the taxes have been miscalculated for years. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Really? I feigned surprise. How strange. Well, I'm sure between the two of you, you can figure something out. You were so confident about managing things this morning. Lorelai's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Valeria, perhaps we should discuss this further. Maybe delay your trip until... Until what? I interrupted softly. Until you've sorted out my future for me? Until your mother is comfortably installed in my home? The glass slipped from her fingers, spilling water across the table. Elijah jumped up to grab napkins, but I remained seated, watching Lorelai's face crumple. You heard that part too? I hear everything in this house, dear. It was my home long before it was yours. Elijah returned with the napkins, his movements jerky with anger or anxiety. Probably both. Mom, we were just exploring options. Nothing was decided. Exactly. I stood up, smoothing my napkin. Nothing was decided, and now nothing will be decided, at least not for a year. But the buyer, Lorelai started. Can wait, I finished firmly. Or not. Either way, I'll be unreachable except for genuine emergencies. My lawyer has all the necessary paperwork. Your lawyer? Elijah's voice cracked. You've already talked to a lawyer? I walked to the sideboard and pulled out a thick envelope. Everything's here. Power of attorney documents, contact information for emergencies, details about the retreat. I'm sure you'll manage beautifully. Mom, please. Elijah followed me as I headed for the door. Can we just talk about this? I turned to face him, seeing for a moment the little boy who used to run to me with his problems, expecting me to fix everything. We are talking, Elijah. I'm telling you, I'm taking control of my own life, whether you approve or not. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. Lorelai's voice rose occasionally. Something about her mother, about plans ruined, about the mysterious buyer who seemed to know too much about the property's history. I packed my camera bag, checking each lens carefully. My phone buzzed with a message from Heidi. Freddie says Phase 1 is complete. Ready for Phase 2? I typed back, absolutely. Let the games begin. Through my window, I could see the lights of the city spreading out below the estate. Somewhere out there, Freddie was preparing the next round of complications for my son and his wife to handle. And I was preparing for something else entirely. I picked up my favorite camera and took one last photo of my bedroom, the room they'd planned to give to Lorelai's mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. The monastery in Nepal was exactly as I remembered it, though I had no intention of staying there for more than a few days. As I settled into my Spartan room, my phone lit up with messages from Heidi. You won't believe what just happened. Her text read, followed by a video attachment. The clip showed Lorelai and Elijah outside Freddie's office, their faces tight with stress. Freddie had positioned a hidden camera perfectly. Bless his thorough nature. The property taxes are non-negotiable. Freddie's voice came through clearly. And my client is very interested in the historical value of the estate. They're prepared to make a compelling offer. We're not selling, Elijah insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. The estate isn't even officially on the market, Lorelai added. My client has ways of acquiring what they want, Freddie replied smoothly. Perhaps if your mother-in-law were here? She's unreachable, Lorelai snapped, on some spiritual journey. I smiled, switching off the video. Perfect. Mind if I join you? A voice asked, making me look up. A woman about my age stood there, camera hanging from her neck. I'm Casey. Valeria, I replied, gesturing to the empty cushion beside me. You're a photographer too? Travel journalist, she said, settling down. Though lately I've been more focused on the travel than the journalist part. You? Just finding myself, I said, then couldn't help laughing at how cliché it sounded. Casey grinned. Running away or running toward something? Both, maybe. I showed her the video on my phone. Teaching my son and daughter-in-law a lesson about respect. As I explained my situation, Casey's eyes widened, then crinkled with amusement. That's either the most brilliant or most devious thing I've ever heard. Why not both? I checked another message from Heidi. Apparently, Lorelai had spent hours researching property tax laws and historical building regulations. So, where are you really going? Casey asked. Because I'm guessing this monastery is just a stopover. I hesitated, then decided to trust my instincts. There was something about Casey that reminded me of myself at my best. Curious, adventurous, unafraid. I have a list, I admitted, pulling out my worn travel journal. Places I photographed in my prime, stories I never finished telling. Casey leaned in, examining the marked pages. Tibet, Indonesia, Peru. Ambitious for a year. Want to join me? The words surprised even me as they came out. I could use a travel companion who understands what I'm doing. Running away while orchestrating elaborate revenge? She laughed. Count me in. I've got nothing better to do. My phone buzzed again. Elijah this time. Mom, please call us. There are some serious issues with the estate we need to discuss. I showed Casey the message. Should I respond? Depends. Has he learned his lesson yet? Not even close. I typed a quick reply. Signal here very weak. We'll try to call when possible. Trust you can handle everything. Love, Mom. Casey pulled out her own phone, showing me her travel blog. We could document your journey. Not the revenge part, obviously, but the rediscovery. It might help others who feel pushed aside. Before I could respond, another message from Heidi popped up. Freddie just dropped the bombshell about the Historical Preservation Society's interest in the property. Lorelai looks ready to explode. Your friend Heidi seems to be enjoying this, Casey observed. She's wanted me to stand up to them for months. I scrolled through more updates. Apparently, Lorelai's mother called today too, asking when she could move in. The timing couldn't be better, Casey said. So, partners? She held out her hand. I'll help you document your journey if you let me share the story, anonymously, of course. I shook her hand, feeling more energized than I had in years. Deal. Where should we go first? Well, she pulled out a map. I hear Tibet is beautiful this time of year, and very hard to reach by phone. As we planned our route, my phone kept buzzing with messages from home. I silenced it, focusing instead on Casey's stories about her own travels. For the first time since overhearing that conversation in my garden, I felt truly free. You know, Casey said as we headed to dinner, your son and his wife might actually thank you for this someday. Thank me? For abandoning them with a financial mess and a mysterious buyer? For teaching them that actions have consequences, she corrected, and that older doesn't mean powerless. I thought about Elijah and Lorelai, probably pacing the estate right now, drowning in paperwork and uncertainty. Maybe. But first, they have to learn the hard way. The best lessons usually are, Casey agreed. Now, about that story you never finished in Tibet. Hold that pose, I called to Casey as she balanced precariously on the ancient temple steps in Tibet. The morning sun caught her silver hair, creating a halo effect I hadn't seen since my professional days. Perfect. Still can't believe we snuck past those guards. She laughed, climbing down. You're a terrible influence, Valeria. Says the woman who convinced me to join that midnight meditation session with the monks. 3 months had passed since we'd left Nepal, and Casey had become more than just a travel companion. She was my confidant, my co-conspirator, and sometimes my conscience. My phone chimed, our daily update from Heidi. Want to see how the kids are doing? I asked, opening the message. Casey peered over my shoulder at the photo. It showed Elijah in Freddie's office again, looking considerably more disheveled than the last time. The Historical Society is demanding a full architectural survey, Heidi's message read. Lorelai's mother keeps calling about moving in. They're cracking. You know, Casey said carefully, your son looks really stressed. I zoomed in on Elijah's face, noting the dark circles under his eyes. Something twisted in my chest, but I pushed it away. He brought this on himself. Did he? Or did his wife? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Elijah's number. I almost declined it, but Casey caught my hand. Answer it, she said softly. You're teaching them a lesson, not torturing them. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello? Mom? Elijah's voice cracked. Finally, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. The reception here is very spotty, I lied, watching prayer flags flutter against the mountain backdrop. Is everything all right? No, nothing's all right. This buyer won't back off. The tax office is threatening liens, and now some historical society is involved. I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, remembering his words from that morning in the garden. We need to think about what's best for her future. I'm sure you and Lorelai can handle it, I said evenly. You seemed quite capable of handling my affairs before. The silence that followed was heavy. Mom, about that, I'm sorry, we shouldn't have... Shouldn't have what? I pressed. Plan to ship me off to Sunset Valley? Replace me with Lorelai's mother? It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. Then what was it like, Elijah? More silence. Then, I messed up, didn't I? Yes, I said, but gently. You did. Will you come home? Help us sort this out? Casey was watching me intently, but I shook my head. Not yet. I'm learning a lot here about family, respect, and karma. Karma? He sounded confused. Ask Lorelai about it. I'm sure she'll understand perfectly. I paused. How is she handling everything? He sighed. Not well. Her mother keeps pressuring us about moving in, but with all these complications, life rarely works out exactly as we plan it, does it? Mom. His voice softened. I miss you. The twist in my chest returned, stronger this time. I miss you too, honey, but this journey is important to me. After hanging up, I found Casey watching me with a knowing smile. He's starting to get it, isn't he? Maybe, I admitted, checking another message from Heidi. Oh, this is interesting. Lorelai's mother is threatening to buy her own place instead. Sounds like your plan is working perfectly, Casey said, adjusting her camera strap. So why do you look sad? I gestured to the ancient temple before us. All these sacred places we visited, they all teach the same thing. Karma isn't about revenge. It's about balance. And you're wondering if you've gone too far? No, I said, then corrected myself. Maybe, I don't know. Casey touched my arm. You're not being cruel, Valeria. You're teaching them something valuable. Look at your son. He's already starting to understand. But maybe it's time to shift the lesson. Show them there's a path to redemption. I thought about Elijah's voice, about the stress in his face. What do you suggest? We're heading to Indonesia next, right? When I nodded, she continued. Why not send them something? A photo, a letter. Show them you're not just running away, but finding yourself. Give them a glimpse of the woman they tried to dismiss. I pulled out my camera, reviewing the shots I'd taken that morning. You know what? You're right. Later that evening, I selected the best photo, me standing proudly against the Tibetan sunrise, looking every bit the accomplished photographer I used to be. I attached it to an email with a simple message. Still learning, still growing, still strong. The estate's future depends on whether you learn to see me as I really am, not as you assumed I should be. Love, Mom. Perfect, Casey approved, reading over my shoulder. Now, about that temple in Bali we were discussing. I hit send and packed away my camera. Lead the way, partner. We've got more stories to tell. The Bali sunset painted the sky orange as I checked my messages at our beachfront cafe. 6 months into my journey, and Heidi's updates had become increasingly dramatic. You need to see this, I said to Casey, holding up my phone. A video played, showing Elijah and Lorelai in what appeared to be a heated argument in our garden. I can't take it anymore. Lorelai's voice was shrill. My mother's furious, the Historical Society is breathing down our necks, and that buyer keeps increasing their offer. What do you want me to do? Elijah shot back. Mom's gone, we can't sell without her consent, and everything's falling apart. Call her again. Make her come back. She won't answer. And honestly, can you blame her? We were going to send her away, Lorelai. Her own home, and we were going to... Don't you dare make this my fault. Lorelai's mascara was running. This was our plan, remember? Both of us. Casey whistled low. Looks like they're reaching breaking point. My phone rang. Heidi's number. Speaking of breaking points, Val, we have a situation, Heidi said without preamble. Lorelai's mother showed up at the estate today. She's refusing to leave until she speaks with you. I sat up straighter. What? She's camping out in the living room. Apparently she sold her house already, expecting to move in. Freddie's having a field day with this. He's hinting that the mysterious buyer might be interested in her property too. That wasn't part of the plan, I said, catching Casey's concerned look. Plans change, Heidi replied. But there's more. Elijah's been asking questions about the property taxes, digging through old records. He's getting suspicious. I rubbed my temples. How suspicious? He visited the Historical Society yesterday. Their representative had no idea about any preservation demands. Damn, I muttered. He's figuring it out. Casey leaned in. Maybe it's time for a new strategy. I nodded slowly. Heidi, tell Freddie to back off a bit. No more pressure about the buyer for now. And Lorelai's mother? Let her stay. In fact, I smiled as an idea formed. Let her experience exactly what she was planning for me. After hanging up, I showed Casey another message that had just arrived. From Elijah. Mom, I know what you're doing. The taxes, the buyer, all of it. Can we talk? Really talk? Casey read it over my shoulder. He's smarter than you gave him credit for. He's his father's son, I admitted. Always could see through my schemes eventually. So what now? I started typing. You're right. Let's talk. Video call in 1 hour? The response was immediate. Yes, please. That hour felt like the longest of my journey. Casey helped me set up my laptop on our balcony, making sure the temple in the background was visible. When Elijah's face appeared on screen, I barely recognized him. He looked older, tired, but somehow more like the son I'd raised. Hi, Mom, he said softly. Nice backdrop. Thanks. How's your house guest? He grimaced. Lorelai's mother is challenging. Now I understand why you... He trailed off. Why I what? Why you did all this. The mysterious buyer, the tax problems, everything. It was never real, was it? I held his gaze through the screen. What makes you say that? Because I know you, Mom. You never let anyone push you around. Not really. He ran a hand through his hair. We were horrible to you. Yes, I agreed. You were. I'm sorry. Not just for the retirement home plan, but for forgetting who you are. Who you've always been. I felt Casey squeeze my shoulder supportively. And who am I, Elijah? A force of nature. He smiled weakly. A world-traveling photographer who raised me single-handedly and built an empire from Dad's dream. Someone who deserves respect, not retirement plans. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them away. And Lorelai? His expression hardened. We're working through things. Her mother's presence is actually helping, believe it or not. Shows her exactly what we were trying to do to you. Karma has a sense of humor, I said. Mom? He leaned closer to the camera. When are you coming home? I glanced at Casey, who nodded encouragingly. I still have more to do here, more stories to tell. But soon, when everyone's ready. Including you? Including me. I picked up my camera. I'm not the same person who left, Elijah. I need you to understand that. I'm starting to, he said. The photos you've been sending, you look like yourself again. Like the mom I remember from when I was young. After we said goodbye, Casey brought over 2 glasses of wine. Well, that was intense. Think he really understands? I think he's getting there. She clinked her glass against mine. Question is, what's your next move? I pulled out my journal, turning to the last unmarked destination. Ever been to Machu Picchu? The estate's front gate looked exactly the same as when I'd left, but everything else had changed. I adjusted my camera strap and glanced at Casey, who'd insisted on accompanying me for this final act. Ready? She asked. No, I admitted. But it's time. We hadn't announced our return. After 9 months away, I wanted the element of surprise on my side one last time. As we approached the front door, voices drifted from the open window of my study. The Historical Society was a fake, Elijah was saying. The buyer too. Mom orchestrated everything. To punish us. Lorelai's voice was thick with tears. No, Elijah replied. To teach us something. Look at these photos she's been sending. Look at her. When's the last time we saw her this alive? I chose that moment to ring the doorbell. The silence that followed was deafening. Then footsteps, running. The door flew open and there stood Elijah, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. Hi, honey, I said. Surprise. He pulled me into a crushing hug before I could say more. Over his shoulder, I saw Lorelai appear in the hallway, her face pale. Mom, Elijah's voice cracked. You're really here. With a friend, I added, gesturing to Casey. Hope you don't mind. We moved to the living room, where evidence of the past 9 months lay scattered across every surface. My photos, legal documents, property records. Lorelai's mother was notably absent. She moved out last week, Lorelai said, following my gaze. Said she couldn't handle the stress anymore. The stress of what? I asked, though I knew the answer. Living in someone else's home. she replied quietly, feeling displaced. I set my camera down and pulled out a thick envelope. I brought something for both of you. Inside were photos from my journey: temples in Tibet, markets in Indonesia, mountains in Peru. But these weren't the polished shots I'd sent them. These showed the real story. Casey and me laughing over missed trains, sharing meals with locals, getting lost in ancient cities. You look so happy, Elijah said, studying each image. I am happy, I confirmed. Happier than I've been in years, and that's partly thanks to you both. Lorelai's head snapped up. What? You forced me to remember who I am. Not just someone's mother or grandmother-in-waiting, but a woman with her own dreams and stories. By trying to send you away, she whispered. By showing me I needed to stand up for myself, I corrected, though your method could have been better. Casey cleared her throat. Show them the other thing. I pulled out another envelope. My lawyer drew these up last week. New arrangements for the estate. Elijah took the papers hesitantly. Mom, you don't have to. Read them, I insisted. As they read, their eyes widened. The documents outlined a clear succession plan. The estate would remain in my name, but with a formal role for both of them in its management. Not as owners, but as partners. Partners? Lorelai's voice shook. If you want, I said, but with conditions. First, this remains my home as long as I live. Second, I'll continue traveling and photographing. Casey and I are starting a documentary series. Third, Casey chimed in, you both need to learn about property law and historical preservation, for real this time. Elijah laughed despite himself. That's fair, more than fair considering what we did. There's one more thing, I added, reaching for my camera. Come here, both of you. I showed them the display screen, a photo of the three of us from last Christmas before everything went wrong. Then I started clicking through more recent shots. Elijah looking stressed in Freddie's office, Lorelai arguing with her mother, both of them slowly unraveling under the pressure I'd created. That was cruel, I admitted, but necessary. The question is, what have we all learned? Lorelai spoke first, her voice steady for the first time. That respect isn't about age, it's about recognizing someone's worth, their story. And that family means supporting each other's growth, Elijah added, not controlling it. I smiled, taking one final photo of this moment, their faces open, understanding, changed. Then I think we're ready to write the next chapter. Together. Casey pulled out her laptop. Speaking of chapters, wait until you see the book proposal we're working on. How to Outfox Your Family, a photographer's journey of revenge and redemption. You're writing a book? Elijah asked. Among other things, I said, standing to look out at my garden. I'm done being just one thing. Mother, photographer, homeowner. I'm all of them and more. And we're okay with that, Elijah said firmly, giving Lorelai a meaningful look. She nodded, wiping her eyes. More than okay. We're proud. Outside, the garden where this had all started was blooming with new life. Like us, I thought, it just needed some pruning to grow stronger. Hold still, I called out, adjusting my camera lens. The light's perfect. Elijah and Lorelai posed on the garden bench, the same one where I'd overheard their plot that started everything. Now it was the centerpiece of my latest photography exhibition. Family ties, a journey of redemption. Mom, my face is freezing, Elijah complained. Just one more, I promised, capturing the moment the morning sun hit their faces. The photo would complete my collection, showing how far we'd come. Casey appeared beside me, reviewing the shots on her tablet. These are gorgeous, Val. The gallery is going to love them. Speaking of the gallery, Lorelai stood, brushing off her dress. We need to finalize the catering for opening night. And the Historical Society wants to know if they can feature the estate in their genuine preservation program. I caught the emphasis on genuine and smiled. Karma comes full circle, doesn't it? Don't remind me, she groaned, but her eyes were warm. Though I have to admit, your revenge taught us more than any gentle conversation could have. Inside, the estate hummed with activity. My old study had been transformed into a proper photography studio where I taught weekend workshops. Elijah managed the business side, while Lorelei, surprisingly, had discovered a passion for architectural preservation. "Your mother called yesterday," I told Lorelei as we reviewed the exhibition layout. "She's enjoying her new apartment." "She is," Lorelei nodded. "And she wanted me to tell you she's sorry. Again, for everything." "Water under the bridge," I said, selecting another photo for display. This one showing Lorelei and her mother sharing tea in the garden, finally finding their own balance. Casey hung up her phone, grinning. That was the publisher. They want to move up the book release to coincide with the exhibition opening. "Perfect timing," Elijah said, bringing in coffee for everyone. "Though I still can't believe you're actually publishing the whole story, Mom, including the fake buyer and tax scheme. Why not?" I adjusted a frame on the wall. "It's a story about growth, not just revenge. Besides, Freddie's already agreed to write the foreword." "Freddie?" Lorelei shook her head. "I still can't believe how thoroughly he played his part." "He's coming to the opening," Casey mentioned. "Said he wouldn't miss seeing the final act of the greatest performance of his career." As we worked, I watched my son and daughter-in-law moving through the house, my house, with a new awareness. They'd learned to respect the space, and me, in ways I never could have taught them directly. "Val," Casey called, "come look at this arrangement." She'd grouped 3 photos together. Me at the monastery where our journey began, Elijah discovering the truth about our scheme, and Lorelei making peace with her mother. Below them, she'd placed the original photo that started it all. Me on Machu Picchu, young and fearless. "It tells the whole story," she said softly. "Not quite," I replied, pulling out my camera. "Everyone gather round." They assembled beneath the photos as I set up the tripod. Even now, they sometimes forgot I could capture more than just images. I could capture truth. "Mom, what are you doing?" Elijah asked. "Completing the story," I said, setting the timer. "The real ending isn't about revenge or teaching lessons. It's about what happens after, how we choose to move forward." I joined them just as the shutter clicked, catching us in a moment of genuine connection. No posed smiles, no forced harmony. Just a family who'd learned the hard way how to see each other clearly. "Perfect," Casey declared, checking the result. "That's your closing piece." "You know," Lorelei said thoughtfully, "when you first left, I thought you were running away. But you were really running toward something, weren't you?" "I was running toward myself," I corrected. "And in doing so, I helped all of us find a better way forward." Elijah picked up one of the exhibition invitations. "Through the lens of truth, a family's journey from deception to understanding. Sure beats Sunset Valley Retirement Community." We all laughed, the sound echoing through the house that had witnessed our transformation. Outside, the garden where it all began continued to bloom, each flower a reminder that growth often requires a little disruption. "Ready for the next adventure?" Casey asked, showing me our upcoming workshop schedule. I looked around at my family. Not just Elijah and Lorelei, but Casey too, who'd helped me rediscover my strength. At the photos telling our complicated, messy, beautiful story. At the estate that had become not a battleground, but a sanctuary for all of us. "Always," I said, picking up my camera. "There are still so many stories to tell." And this time, I knew we'd tell them together.
I came into this world during what you might call the worst possible timing. My parents' marriage was already hanging by a thread, and my arrival didn't exactly help matters. I'm Nicole, and my father Tom wasn't exactly thrilled when Mom told him she was pregnant. "You planned this, didn't you, Sarah?" he shouted during one of their fights. "Got pregnant on purpose just to trap me here." I've heard this story so many times from Mom that I can almost see it playing out, even though I wasn't old enough to remember it myself. Mom always said Dad was too carefree, too irresponsible to be a real family man. He'd rather spend his paycheck on whatever caught his fancy than save for our future. Their arguments echoed through our small house for 4 long years after I was born. Sometimes they were about money, sometimes about Dad's late nights out, sometimes about me. It seemed like everything was a trigger for another explosive fight. When I turned 5, they finally made it official and got divorced. Dad didn't stick around to see how that worked out. He just vanished. No goodbye, no forwarding address, not a single child support payment. It was like he'd never existed, except for the hole he left in our lives and Mom's growing bitterness. "Your father is nothing but a selfish coward," Mom would tell me whenever I asked about him. "A real man doesn't abandon his child." She'd get this hard look in her eyes every time his name came up, and eventually, I learned to stop asking. The only connection I had left to Dad's side of the family was my grandmother, Eleanor. She and Mom couldn't stand each other. Grandma Eleanor blamed Mom for the failed marriage, saying she'd pushed Dad away with her constant nagging about money and responsibility. Mom, in turn, couldn't even bear to be in the same room as Grandma. When it was time for my visits with Grandma Eleanor, Mom would drive me to her house, practically drop me at the doorstep, and leave without even stepping inside. But once inside, everything changed. Grandma Eleanor would wrap me in warm hugs and tell me stories about Dad when he was young. She'd run her fingers through my hair and smile softly. "You look just like your father, sweetheart," she'd say. "You have his eyes, his smile, even that little dimple when you laugh." 3 years passed in a blur of weekend visits to Grandma Eleanor's house, filled with cookies, stories, and the warmth I couldn't find at home. By the time I turned 8, I had settled into a routine of sorts: weekdays with Mom, who was still bitter about Dad, and those precious weekends with Grandma, who never stopped hoping he'd return. But everything changed one rainy Tuesday in October. Mom got a call that made her face turn pale. "Get your coat, Nicole," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "Grandma Eleanor wants to see us both. It's important." The drive to Grandma's house was different this time. Usually, Mom would just drop me off and speed away, but today she parked the car and actually walked with me to the door. Something was wrong, I could feel it in the heavy silence between us. Grandma Eleanor looked smaller somehow, lying in her bed with papers scattered around her. Her usually perfectly styled silver hair was messy, and her face had a grayish tinge that scared me. But she smiled when she saw us, reaching out her thin hands. "Sarah, Nicole, thank you for coming," she said, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "Please, sit down. Both of you." Mom actually sat down without argument, which was when I knew this was really serious. Grandma Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was there too, standing quietly in the corner like a somber statue. "I need to discuss something important," Grandma said, looking first at me, then at Mom. "I'm not well, and I need to make sure everything is properly arranged." She paused to catch her breath. "My house and part of my savings will go to your Aunt Linda, Nicole. But I've set up something special for you." I remember playing with the hem of my sweater, not really understanding what was happening. Adult conversations about arrangements and papers always bored me, but I knew I was supposed to pay attention. "I'm creating an educational fund for Nicole," Grandma continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her plans. "It will cover her college expenses when she turns 18. Mr. Peterson here will manage it until then." Mom's posture changed at these words. She sat up straighter, her eyes widening slightly. I noticed her hands, usually fidgety with anxiety, grow still in her lap. "The money can only be accessed for educational purposes, and Nicole will have full control of it when she turns 18, Mr. Peterson added, stepping forward with some papers. "Mrs. Eleanor has been very specific about these terms." I sat there, swinging my legs back and forth, more interested in the pattern of the wallpaper than in what they were discussing. College seemed like something from another lifetime. I was more concerned about my upcoming spelling test and whether Jenny Martinez would invite me to her birthday party. "Everything is arranged, Sarah," Grandma said, reaching for Mom's hand. For once, Mom didn't pull away. "I want to make sure my granddaughter has opportunities, regardless of everything else." The unspoken mention of Dad hung in the air between them. After signing some papers and saying our goodbyes, Mom and I drove home in silence. But this silence felt different from our usual tense quiet. It was almost peaceful. As we pulled into our driveway, Mom turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Well," she said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips, "it seems at least one person in your father's family turned out to be decent after all." I didn't fully grasp the significance of that day until much later. At 8 years old, all I knew was that Grandma Eleanor had done something nice for me, and for once, Mom wasn't angry about it. The concept of college money meant nothing to me then. I was more excited about the butterscotch candy Grandma had slipped into my pocket when we left. Grandma Eleanor passed away just a few weeks after our last visit. The funeral was small and quiet, and I noticed Mom actually shed a few tears, though she tried to hide them. With Grandma gone, it felt like the last bridge to my father's world had crumbled away. Life moved on, as it always does. Over the next 2 years, Mom started dating a guy named Robert. He seemed nice enough, he had a good job at a bank, drove a nice car, and always brought me small gifts when he came to visit. Mom smiled more when he was around, and I hadn't seen her smile like that in years. Then they decided to get married. I was 10 at the time, and the prospect of having a complete family again made my heart flutter with excitement. But the real news came when Mom told me Robert had a daughter my age named Ashley, who would be moving in with us. I remember jumping up and down, my mind filled with visions of sharing secrets, having sleepovers in the same room, and finally having someone to play with who wasn't just a school friend. After years of being an only child in a broken home, the idea of having a sister seemed like a dream come true. The day they moved in, I had decorated our shared room with welcome signs and laid out some of my favorite books and toys to share. Ashley walked in, took one look around, and asked her dad if she could have her own room instead. "I don't want to share with her," she said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "She's not really my sister." That was just the beginning. Ashley quickly staked her claim on Mom's attention. She'd curl up next to her on the couch during movie nights, pushing me to the side. She started calling Mom Mommy within the first week, and Mom's face would light up every time she did. "Mom, want to see my art project?" I'd ask, holding up my drawing. "In a minute, honey," Mom would reply, but that minute never came because Ashley would already be showing Mom her homework or telling her about her day. When I finally broke down and told Mom how I felt, her response cut deep. "Don't be selfish, Nicole," she said, barely looking up from helping Ashley with her homework. "Ashley lost her mother when she was very young. She needs extra attention and a woman's love. You should understand that." "But what about my love?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and retreated to my newly silent room, where Ashley's empty bed served as a constant reminder that I wasn't enough, not for my father, and now, it seemed, not for my mother either. The changes in our family happened so gradually that at first, I barely noticed them. But looking back now, I can see how each small moment added up to create an ever-widening gap between me and my mother. It started with shopping trips. Mom would come home with bags full of designer clothes for Ashley, fancy jeans, brand-name sneakers, cute tops from expensive stores. Meanwhile, I got my clothes from department store sales and discount outlets. "Ashley needs to maintain a certain appearance at her new school," Mom would say when I pointed out the difference. "Besides, you're not as interested in fashion as she is." Then came the biggest bombshell: they were sending Ashley to Riverside Prep, the expensive private school across town. I still remember the day they announced it over dinner. "Ashley's test scores are exceptional," Robert said proudly. "She needs a more challenging academic environment." "What about me?" I asked, pushing my peas around my plate. "Could I go to Riverside too?" Mom and Robert exchanged that look I'd come to hate, the one that meant they'd already discussed this without me. "Honey, you're doing fine at Lincoln Public," Mom said. "Ashley has different needs. She's really gifted, you know. The regular program suits you better." That night, I cried into my pillow until I had no tears left. But something changed in me after that. As the years passed, I stopped trying to compete for Mom's attention. I stopped showing her my report cards, stopped telling her about my achievements, stopped hoping she'd notice me. By 15, I'd accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I threw myself into my studies at Lincoln Public, not for them, but for myself. I joined the debate team, competed in science fairs, and maintained straight A's. My teachers would write glowing comments on my papers: exceptional analysis, Nicole, outstanding work, you have a bright future ahead. Meanwhile, at home, dinner conversations revolved around Ashley's latest achievements at Riverside Prep. Her participation in the Model UN conference. Her selection for the Advanced Placement program. Her tennis tournaments against other private schools. Ashley's English teacher says she has real potential as a writer, Mom would gush. She gets straight A's without even trying, Robert would add proudly. I'd sit there quietly eating my dinner, thinking about my own straight A's, about how I'd just won first place in the regional science fair, about how my debate team coach wanted me to lead the team next year. But I kept these thoughts to myself. What was the point of sharing them? My achievements at a public school couldn't possibly compare to Ashley's private school accomplishments, at least not in their eyes. Still, there were moments, like when Mom and Robert would attend every single one of Ashley's tennis matches but couldn't make it to my debate team finals, that the old hurt would surface. But I'd learned to push it down, to focus on what I could control. I had my education, my goals, and thanks to Grandma Eleanor's foresight, I had a future that was mine alone. Senior year flew by in a whirlwind of college applications and scholarship essays. As graduation approached, I found myself sitting at my desk late into the night, surrounded by brochures from different universities. My grades had opened up a lot of possibilities. I was particularly excited about State University's full scholarship program and had already been pre-approved based on my academic record. You don't have to take the scholarship route, you know, my guidance counselor, Mrs. Martinez, had told me. With your grandmother's college fund, you could attend any school you want. But I had bigger plans for that money. I want to be smart about it, I explained to her. If I can get a full scholarship, I can save the fund for a down payment on a house after graduation. Mrs. Martinez had smiled at that. Always thinking ahead, aren't you, Nicole? 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, Mom called me down for what she termed a family meeting. I found them all sitting in the living room, Mom perched nervously on the edge of her favorite armchair, Robert looking serious on the couch, and Ashley beside him, not quite meeting my eyes. Sit down, Nicole, Mom said, patting the ottoman across from her. We need to discuss something important. I sat, noting how formal everything felt. Usually, family discussions happened over dinner or in passing, never with this kind of setup. As you know, Mom began, Ashley is graduating this year too. She paused, glancing at my stepsister. We'd been looking at colleges. I got accepted to Princeton, Ashley interrupted, finally looking at me. It's my dream school. That's, congratulations, I said, not sure why this required a family meeting. The thing is, Robert jumped in, even with Ashley's excellent education at Riverside Prep, her grades don't quite qualify her for a full scholarship. Mom leaned forward. We've spent so much on her private school education, and it's been worth every penny, but we just don't have the resources for Princeton's tuition. I sat there, still not understanding why they were telling me this. Then Mom dropped the bomb. We were hoping, since you have your grandmother's college fund, you might be willing to share it with Ashley. The room went silent. I stared at Mom, waiting for her to say she was joking. But her face remained serious, expectant even. Share my college fund? I repeated slowly. The one Grandma Eleanor set up specifically for my education? You're getting a full scholarship anyway, Ashley said, as if this justified everything. You don't even need the money. We're family, Mom added softly. Family helps each other. I sat there, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The college fund, my safety net, my future, my grandmother's last gift to me, they wanted me to hand it over to Ashley. The same Ashley who'd spent years making sure I knew I wasn't really family. The same Ashley who got everything while I got the leftovers. No, the word came out of my mouth before I could even process the full weight of what they were asking. Absolutely not. What do you mean, no? Mom's voice took on that sharp edge I'd grown to know so well. I mean no. This money was left to me by my grandmother. It's mine, and I'm going to use it for my future. Robert's face turned red. Do you hear how selfish she sounds, Sarah? This is exactly what I've been talking about for years. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Selfish? That's rich coming from you guys. Watch your tone, young lady, Robert snapped. You've always been jealous of Ashley. Always trying to compete with her, and now you're taking your revenge by denying her a chance at a good education. The absurdity of his statement made me laugh again, though there was no humor in it. Jealous? Of what exactly? Of how you've given her everything while treating me like an afterthought? And by the way, if she's as brilliant as you've always claimed, why didn't she earn a scholarship like I did? Ashley's face crumpled, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. She jumped up from the couch and ran upstairs, her dramatic exit punctuated by the slamming of her bedroom door. How dare you? Mom's voice was quiet, dangerous. How dare you be so cruel? Cruel? I'm being cruel? I stood up, my hands shaking. You're the ones trying to take away my college fund. Mom stood too, her face hard. Well, then, let me make this very clear. You have 2 weeks until your birthday to change your mind. If you don't agree to share that money with your sister, you can find somewhere else to live. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. What? You're kicking me out? This is my house too. No, Nicole, it's not. Mom's voice was cold. This house is in my name. You'll be 18, an adult. I'm not legally obligated to support you anymore. I can't believe this, I whispered. I can't believe you're choosing her over me. Again. You're choosing money over family, Robert shot back. Family? I practically spat the word. When have you ever treated me like family? They had no answer for that. Instead, Mom just said, 2 weeks, Nicole. Think carefully about your choice. The next 3 days were like living in a ghost town where I was the only ghost. No one spoke to me at breakfast. My questions at dinner were met with silence. Ashley acted like I was invisible, and Mom and Robert treated me like an unwelcome houseguest who had overstayed their welcome. I ate my meals in my room, spent my free time at the library, and tried to make myself as scarce as possible. But every night, lying in my bed, I could hear them in the living room, talking, laughing, watching TV together. A happy family of 3, with no room for a 4th. For days after that disastrous family meeting, I called Mr. Peterson, my grandmother's lawyer. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number, but his warm, familiar voice helped calm my nerves. Nicole, I was just thinking about you. Your 18th birthday is coming up soon. Yes, Mr. Peterson, that's actually why I'm calling. I took a deep breath and told him everything, the demand for money, the ultimatum, all of it. He listened quietly until I finished, then cleared his throat. Those funds are legally yours to control the moment you turn 18, Nicole. Your grandmother was very specific about that. And frankly, I think she suspected something like this might happen someday. What do you mean? Let's just say, she knew her son's ex-wife very well. He paused. Now, about your living situation. Look, here's what I suggest. Pick your college first, preferably one in a different city, then find an apartment nearby. I can help you with the paperwork. You won't be able to access the funds until your birthday, but we can get everything set up in advance. I spent that afternoon researching apartments near State University, where I'd already been accepted with a full scholarship. By evening, I'd found a small but decent place, just a 10-minute walk from campus. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was willing to hold it for me with just a promise of payment on my birthday. For the next week, I quietly packed my life into boxes, one small piece at a time. I didn't want anyone to notice what I was doing. Each night, after everyone was asleep, I'd pack another box and hide it in my closet. Photos, books, clothes, my life condensed into cardboard containers. On the morning of my 18th birthday, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "Well?" she asked, arms crossed. "Have you made your decision?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt strangely calm. "Yes, I have." The answer is still no. "Then you know what that means." Her voice was hard. "I want you out of this house today." "Okay," I said simply. I think my calm acceptance threw her off. She probably expected tears or begging. Instead, I went upstairs, got my pre-packed boxes, and called the taxi I'd scheduled the day before. 20 minutes later, I was turning the key in the lock of my new apartment. The first thing I did was call Mr. Peterson, who had all the paperwork ready. By noon, I had access to my grandmother's fund. By 1 o'clock, I'd paid my first month's rent and security deposit to Mrs. Chen. That afternoon, I walked to the local coffee shop where I'd applied for a job the week before. The manager, Mike, had already agreed to hire me for the summer before college started. My apartment was small, just a studio with a kitchenette, but it was mine. That night, as I sat on my newly purchased air mattress, eating takeout and watching the sunset through my single window, I felt something unexpected: freedom. 2 weeks into my new life, I was scrolling through Facebook during my coffee shop break when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends from high school were messaging me, "Have you seen your mom's post? Are you okay? What's going on?" With shaking hands, I pulled up Mom's page and there it was, a long, dramatic post about ungrateful children and family loyalty. "My daughter has broken our hearts," she wrote. "After everything we've done for her, she selfishly refused to help her sister get a college education. Instead, she's hoarding money from her grandmother while her sister's dreams are put on hold. I never thought I'd raise such a selfish, heartless child." The comments below were worse. Relatives I barely knew were chiming in, "How could she be so ungrateful? Family should come first. What a spoiled brat." I sat there in the break room, my coffee getting cold, as anger and hurt battled inside me. Then something snapped. If Mom wanted to air our dirty laundry on social media, fine. Let's tell the whole story. I opened my laptop and started typing. Since my mother has chosen to make our private family matters public, let me share my side of the story. Yes, I refused to give my stepsister my college fund, money that my grandmother specifically left for my education. What my mother forgot to mention is that she gave me an ultimatum: either give up my inheritance or get kicked out of the house. On my 18th birthday, she followed through on that threat. I was forced to move out because I wouldn't give away money that legally belonged to me. For years, I watched as my stepsister got private school education while I went to public school. I watched as she got expensive clothes while I got department store leftovers. I worked hard, got straight A's, and earned a full scholarship to college, something I'm proud of. But apparently, that wasn't enough. They wanted my inheritance too. So yes, I chose to keep my grandmother's gift to me. And yes, I'm now living on my own, working and preparing for college. But I didn't choose this situation, my mother did when she kicked her own daughter out on her birthday. I hit post and went back to work. By the time my shift ended, the response was overwhelming. Former teachers, neighbors, even some of Mom's old friends were commenting with messages of support. People who'd known our family for years started sharing stories of how they'd noticed the favoritism, but never said anything. My phone rang that evening. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "How dare you?" she hissed when I answered. "Do you know how humiliating this is? Mrs. Peterson from church won't even look at me anymore. Half my friends are questioning my parenting." "Maybe they should," I said calmly. "You kicked your daughter out for not giving away her inheritance. What kind of parent does that?" "I did everything for you." "No, Mom. You did everything for Ashley. And that's fine, she's your daughter now, but I'm done. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up and blocked her number. Then I blocked her on all social media, along with Robert and Ashley. It was surprisingly easy, like cutting away dead weight I'd been carrying for years. Now I'm in my first semester at State University, studying business management. My small apartment feels more like home every day. Sometimes I think about them, Mom, Robert, and Ashley, but those thoughts come less and less often. Grandma Eleanor's picture sits on my desk, and sometimes I swear she's smiling at me with pride. She knew, somehow, that I'd need this money not just for education, but for freedom. She gave me the means to choose my own path, and I'll never forget that. Growing up, I always knew I was the second choice. My name is Emma, and from my earliest memories, I watched my parents shower my older brother Michael with endless attention and opportunities while I stood in the shadows. The difference in how they treated us wasn't subtle, it was as clear as day. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, doing homework alone, while Mom and Dad drove Michael to his latest singing competition or club meeting. He was 3 years older than me, and somehow that made him more deserving of everything. Every time his teachers mentioned even the slightest talent, my parents jumped at the chance to nurture it, spending money we didn't really have on lessons and equipment. Michael has such a beautiful voice, Mom would gush to anyone who would listen. He's going to be something special one day. Meanwhile, I learned early on not to ask for much. When I showed interest in art classes, Mom just smiled apologetically. Maybe next semester, honey. Michael's voice lessons are taking up the budget right now. The disparity became even more apparent during Michael's senior year of high school. I was 15 at the time, sitting quietly at dinner when my parents made their big announcement. "We've been saving up," Dad said proudly, "and we're going to send Michael to Preston College. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the state." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing." "And that's not all," Mom added. "You can stay in our apartment near the campus. No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." I pushed my peas around my plate, trying to hide my disappointment. Not that anyone was looking at me anyway. They were all focused on Michael's beaming face as he talked about his future plans. That night, lying in bed, I did the math. If they were spending this much on Michael's education and giving him a free apartment, there was no way they'd have anything left for my college fund. The realization hit me hard, but instead of crying, I started planning. The next day, I visited my grandparents' antique store. My grandfather listened as I explained my situation. "Well, Emma," he said, studying me carefully, "I could just give you the money for college." He paused, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "But I think it would be better if you earned it yourself. How would you like to work here after school?" So that's how it started. While Michael packed up for his prestigious college adventure, I began working at the antique store. Every afternoon after school, I'd help catalog items, assist customers, and learn the business from my grandfather. My grandmother would bring me snacks and tell me stories about the vintage pieces we sold. My parents' reaction to my initiative was telling. When I told them about my job and my plans to save for college, they seemed relieved, almost grateful that I'd solved my own problem. 3 years of working at my grandparents' antique store flew by. Every afternoon spent dusting old furniture and organizing vintage jewelry had paid off. I'd saved enough money for college. When I graduated high school, there wasn't much fanfare, just a quiet dinner at home. But I didn't mind, I was proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. I enrolled in the local state college, choosing a practical business program that wouldn't drain my savings. The tuition was reasonable, and I even had some money left over. Living at home and taking the bus to campus wasn't glamorous, but it made financial sense. "Mom, Dad," I broached the subject one evening, "I've been thinking about getting a used car. It would make getting to classes easier." Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, Emma. We just don't have the money for that right now." Mom chimed in, "The bus system is perfectly fine. Lots of students use it." I bit my tongue, remembering how they'd helped Michael get his license and even contributed to his first car. But that was ancient history now. My first year of college passed quickly, and just as I was finishing my spring finals, our house erupted with excitement Michael was graduating from Preston College. Mom and Dad threw him an elaborate celebration, inviting what felt like half the town. Our house was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors, all there to celebrate my brother's achievement. I was arranging appetizers in the kitchen when Michael made his grand entrance with a pretty blonde woman on his arm. Sarah, his college girlfriend. They were beaming as they walked into the room, hand in hand. "Everyone," Michael announced, commanding immediate attention, "Sarah and I have some exciting news. We're engaged." The room exploded with cheers and congratulations. Mom burst into tears of joy, and Dad clapped Michael on the back so hard I thought he might fall over. "But wait, there's more," Sarah added, her voice sweet as honey. "After the wedding, we'll be moving to Connecticut. My parents own a successful business there, and they want us to take it over." Mom's tears turned into full-on sobbing. "My baby boy, a successful businessman. That's my son," Dad proclaimed proudly. "Always knew you were destined for great things." I stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Nobody seemed to notice that I'd just finished my freshman year with a 4.0 GPA, or that I'd been working part-time at a local cafe while maintaining my studies. But I was used to it by now. The wedding preparations consumed the next year. While I focused on my studies, now in my third year, Mom and Dad threw themselves into planning the perfect wedding for their perfect son. They took out a substantial loan to cover everything: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band. Nothing was too good for Michael and Sarah. The wedding itself was exactly what you'd expect: extravagant, emotional, and all about Michael. I stood in my bridesmaid dress, which I had to pay for myself, watching my parents beam with pride as they danced with the happy couple. They'd spared no expense, even though I knew they'd be paying off the loan for years to come. After Michael and Sarah left for Connecticut, I stood in my cramped bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my textbooks. An idea struck me: the apartment where Michael had lived during college was now empty. It was perfectly located near campus, and it would give me some much-needed independence. I approached my parents that evening while they were watching TV. "Mom, Dad, since Michael's apartment is empty now, would it be okay if I moved in there?" They exchanged glances before Mom spoke. "Well, honey, you can move in, but you'll need to pay rent." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Rent? But Michael lived there for free. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. "That was different. We have the wedding loan to pay off now. We need the extra income." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm your daughter too," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've never asked you for anything. I worked for my college money. I take the bus everywhere. Mom held up her hand to stop me. She and Dad had one of their silent conversations, the kind they used to have when deciding whether to spend money on another of Michael's activities. "Fine," Mom finally said. "We'll charge you half the normal rent." I wanted to argue more, but I knew this was the best offer I'd get. "Okay, I'll take it." That weekend, I moved into the apartment. It still had traces of Michael everywhere: holes in the walls from his college posters, water rings on the coffee table from his late-night study sessions. I took extra shifts at the cafe to cover the rent, often working until closing time. Between classes, studying, and work, I barely had time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur of textbooks, coffee shop aprons, and midnight study sessions. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. While my classmates' families planned parties and celebrations, my parents opted for a quiet dinner at home. They only invited my grandparents, no extended family, no friends, no elaborate catering like Michael's graduation. We sat around the dining room table, eating the lasagna I'd made myself. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Emma, dear, we're so proud of you," she said warmly. "Graduating with highest honors while working part-time, that's quite an achievement." Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed. Her face lit up as she read the message. "Oh, speaking of achievements," she interrupted, "Michael just texted. The business is doing wonderfully. He says they're expanding into 2 new locations. I watched as my graduation dinner turned into a celebration of Michael's success in Connecticut. My grandparents exchanged knowing looks, and Grandpa squeezed my shoulder supportively. My hard work in college paid off sooner than I expected. Within 2 weeks of graduation, I landed a position at Anderson & Mitchell, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The starting salary was better than I dared hope for, and I was thrilled to finally be starting my career. That excitement lasted exactly 3 days, until my parents found out about my salary. "Emma," Mom said during one of her unexpected visits to the apartment, "now that you're making good money, you should start paying the full rent amount." I stared at her, wondering if I'd heard correctly. "But we agreed on half." "That was when you were a student," she replied matter-of-factly. "You can afford it now." I wanted to point out that Michael had lived here for free even after getting a job, but I'd learned that comparing myself to my brother was pointless. The apartment's location was perfect, just a 10-minute walk from my office, so I reluctantly agreed. Life fell into a routine. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove my worth at the company. Every month, like clockwork, Mom would call. "Emma, dear, just reminding you about the rent. It's due on Friday. We're counting on that money." 3 years passed this way. I earned a significant promotion and raise, but I kept that information to myself. I'd learned my lesson: any hint of financial success would just lead to more demands from my parents. Through their occasional updates, I heard that Michael and Sarah had a baby boy. I'd seen pictures on social media, but hadn't visited. Our communication had dwindled to perfunctory birthday messages and holiday greetings. I was fine with that. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Emma?" Mom's voice was tight with tension. "We need to talk about your brother. There's been some trouble. The business, well, it's gone bankrupt. He had a terrible fight with Sarah's parents. They're furious about how he managed things. They're not speaking anymore." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was heading. "He's coming back home," she continued. "With Sarah and the baby." "Oh," I said carefully. "I assume he'll be staying with you and Dad?" "Actually," Mom paused. "That apartment you're in is quite large. He'll be staying there." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "What? Mom, this is my home. I've been living here for years." "Don't be dramatic, Emma. Your brother needs help. He doesn't have any money right now, so he'll stay there for free. You can keep paying the rent." "That's absurd," I protested. "If he's moving in, maybe I should just find my own place." "Don't you dare." Mom's voice turned sharp. "We need your rent money now more than ever. Michael's going through a rough time. You wouldn't want to make things harder for him, would you?" I shook my head in disbelief and hung up without another word. The moving day was worse than I'd imagined. Michael, Sarah, and their crying baby Tommy showed up with a mountain of luggage and baby equipment. Mom arrived to supervise the transition, which apparently meant making my life as uncomfortable as possible. "Emma, clear out your room," Mom directed, hands on her hips. Michael and Sarah need it for Tommy's nursery. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, my personal space for the past 4 years. "What? Where am I supposed to sleep?" "The living room has a perfectly good couch," she replied, already starting to move my things. "You can't be serious. I pay rent here, full rent, and you're putting me on the couch." Mom's expression hardened. "Don't be selfish, Emma. Your brother has a baby. Babies need proper rooms." So I watched helplessly as my bedroom was transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, and all the other baby paraphernalia. My belongings were unceremoniously piled in a corner of the living room, which was now my bedroom. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Michael moped around the apartment all day, alternating between complaining about his in-laws and reminiscing about his glory days as a successful businessman. Sarah spent her time either crying or arguing with Michael about whose turn it was to change Tommy's diaper. The baby seemed to sense the tension and cried constantly. I'd come home from a long day at work to find dishes piled in the sink, toys scattered everywhere, and dirty laundry spilling out of the hamper. The first few times, I tried ignoring the mess, but the dirty dishes attracted ants, and the clutter made it impossible to relax in what was now my bedroom. So I cleaned, I cooked, I did laundry. And every meal I prepared mysteriously disappeared before I could eat it. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at work, I decided to extend an olive branch. "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, "we actually have some openings at my company. I could put in a good word for you with HR. The benefits are great, and the starting salary is decent." Michael looked up from his phone, his face twisting with indignation. "An entry-level position? Are you kidding me? I'm a businessman, Emma, I don't do entry-level. I need an executive position, something worthy of my experience." "Your experience running a business into the ground?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Michael's face turned red. "You don't know anything about what happened. That was my in-laws' fault. They set me up to fail." He stormed off to his room, my old room, leaving me standing there, wondering how much longer I could live like this. 3 months into our forced cohabitation, I sat at my kitchen table, now covered in Tommy's dried baby food and Sarah's coffee rings, reviewing my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie, my expenses had nearly doubled since Michael and his family moved in. That was the final push I needed to call my parents. I rehearsed what I would say, determined to remain calm and rational. The phone conversation went about as well as expected. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about the living situation," I began. "Michael and Sarah aren't contributing anything to the household expenses. They're eating all my food, using utilities I pay for, and—" "Emma," Mom cut me off, her voice sharp. "I can't believe how selfish you're being. Your brother lost everything. His in-laws betrayed him. He has a baby to take care of." Dad's voice joined in from the background. "You should be grateful you're in a position to help family." "But that's just it," I pressed on. "I'm not just helping, I'm carrying the entire financial burden. They don't buy groceries, they don't." "Enough," Mom snapped. "Your brother is going through a difficult time. This isn't forever. You need to be more understanding." That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. I bookmarked several promising options, all within walking distance of my office. Just in case, I told myself. Just in case things get worse. Things got worse exactly 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my couch bed, trying to focus on work documents while Tommy wailed in the background and Michael and Sarah had their fourth argument of the day. The doorbell rang, and my parents walked in without waiting for anyone to answer. Mom had that look on her face, the one she used to get right before announcing Michael had been enrolled in another expensive program. Dad stood behind her, avoiding eye contact. "Emma, we need to discuss the rent," Mom announced. I looked up from my laptop. "I paid this month's rent on time, as always." "Yes, but starting next month, we're doubling it." The room fell silent, even Tommy stopped crying. I stared at my mother, certain I had misheard. "Double? But I'm already paying the full market rate." Mom gestured around the apartment. "Well, now there are more people living here. More wear and tear on the property. More utilities being used. It's only fair that the rent reflects that." "Fair?" I couldn't help but laugh. "How is it fair that I should pay double rent for being forced to sleep on a couch in my own living room? If anyone should pay more, it should be Michael. He's the one who—" "I'm not paying anything," Michael jumped up from his chair. "This is ridiculous. I lost everything, and now you want me to pay rent?" "Of course not, sweetie," Mom soothed, before turning back to me with a harder expression. "Emma, you have a good job. You can afford this. Your brother needs time to get back on his feet." I looked at each of their faces, Mom's stern expectation, Dad's awkward avoidance, Michael's entitled indignation, Sarah's smug satisfaction. 3 months of built-up frustration threatened to explode, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I simply nodded. Fine, I said quietly. Double rent starting next month. Mom's face broke into a satisfied smile. She and Dad left shortly after, clearly pleased with how smoothly their announcement had gone. They had no idea they'd just given me the push I needed to finally make my decision. Later that evening, while trying to read a book on my uncomfortable couch bed, I overheard Michael and Sarah talking in the kitchen. They were trying to whisper, but their excitement made them careless. "Can you believe it?" Sarah giggled. "Your mom just told me they're going to give us half of Emma's rent money every month." Michael's smug reply made my blood boil. "Of course they are. They understand we need help right now. Emma makes plenty of money, she can support us for a while." "This is perfect," Sarah continued. "We get to live here for free, and we'll even have spending money. Your sister doesn't need to know." I lay there, gripping my book so hard my knuckles turned white. All this time, I'd thought my parents were just being unfair, but this was a calculated scheme. They weren't just enabling Michael, they were actively planning to use me to fund his laziness. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the apartment listings I'd bookmarked. One caught my eye, a modern one-bedroom in a quiet building, actually closer to my office than the current apartment. The rent was exactly what I'd been paying before the proposed increase. I called the number immediately, trying to keep my voice down. "Hi, I'm interested in the apartment on Cedar Street." "Yes, I could come see it right now if that's possible." "Perfect, I'll be there in 15 minutes. The apartment was everything I hoped for: clean, quiet, and Michael-free. I signed the lease on the spot and paid the security deposit with my emergency savings. Back at the apartment, I waited until everyone was asleep before quietly packing my essential belongings into 2 large suitcases. I left my furniture, it wasn't worth the hassle, and I could buy new pieces that didn't have memories of this mess attached to them. The next morning, I wheeled my suitcases to the door while Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying to. "Going somewhere?" he asked, barely looking up. "Month-long business trip," I lied smoothly. "Big project in our Cincinnati office." He just grunted, already uninterested. I moved into my new apartment that evening, ordering takeout and sitting on the floor of my empty living room. The silence was beautiful. No crying baby, no arguing couple, no guilt-tripping parents. Just peace. For the next month, I lived quietly in my new home. I bought a comfortable bed, a cozy couch that wasn't a bed, and kitchen supplies that only I would use. I cooked meals that stayed in my refrigerator until I ate them. I slept through the night without being awakened by Tommy's crying. Then, right on schedule, my phone rang with my mother's number. "Emma," she snapped without preamble, "why haven't you sent the full rent payment? We agreed on double, remember?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Actually, Mom, I know all about your little arrangement with Michael and Sarah. Were you planning to tell me that half my rent money was going straight into their pockets? That's none of your business. Your brother needs—" "No, Mom," I interrupted, still chuckling. "What my brother needs is to grow up and take responsibility for once in his life. I've moved out, found my own place. The apartment is all yours and Michael's now." "You what?" she screeched. "You can't do this. We need that rent money." "Well, I'm sure Michael will step up and start paying rent now that he's had time to get back on his feet. I can't wait to see how that works out for you." There was a moment of silence on the phone after my declaration. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head as reality finally sank in. Their reliable source of income was gone, and all they had left was their unemployed son who had never paid a bill in his life. "Emma, sweetie," Mom's voice suddenly turned sugary sweet, a tone I recognized from childhood when she wanted something. "Let's not be hasty. We can work something out. What if we go back to the original rent amount? That was fair, wasn't it?" I settled deeper into my new couch, the one I'd picked out myself, in my own apartment, where no one could kick me out of my bedroom. "No, Mom, that's not going to happen." "But Emma, we're family. You can't just—" Family? I interrupted. Is that what you call it when you scheme behind my back to funnel my money to Michael? When you kick me out of my own bedroom while I'm paying all the bills? When you've spent my entire life treating me like an ATM while treating Michael like royalty? That's not fair. We've always... Goodbye, Mom. I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. That was 6 months ago. My grandparents keep me updated on this situation, though I never ask. They just know I need to hear it, need to know I made the right choice. According to them, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy are still living in the apartment. They haven't paid a single month's rent. Mom and Dad are covering all the utilities, plus giving them spending money because the baby needs things. My brother still hasn't found a job. Apparently, there just aren't enough executive positions available for failed businessmen with a track record of bankruptcy. My new life is peaceful. I got another promotion at work, bought myself a car, and started taking evening classes for my MBA. My apartment is always clean, my food stays in my fridge until I want to eat it, and I sleep in my own bed every night. The other day, I ran into Sarah's cousin at the grocery store. She told me they're expecting another baby. I just smiled and wished them well, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents are probably already figuring out how to pay for another nursery. But that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. And it feels absolutely right. I'm Audrey, and I came into this world mere minutes after my twin sister Ashley. Those few minutes might as well have been years, given how differently our lives would unfold. Our parents, Linda and Robert Matthews, lived in a suburban house in Connecticut. Mom worked as a real estate agent, always dressed to impress, with her perfectly manicured nails and designer suits. Dad ran his own small accounting firm, spending most of his days buried in spreadsheets and tax forms. They seemed like your typical middle-class family, except for one thing, their obvious favoritism toward Ashley. I first noticed it when we were around 5. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't living it every day. While other parents of twins dressed their children identically, celebrating their matching status, our parents made sure Ashley stood out. They'd take us shopping, and Ashley would get the new Nike sneakers while I got the clearance rack specials. She got the authentic Barbie dolls, I got the knockoffs from the dollar store. Even our birthday celebrations felt uneven. Ashley's portion of our shared cake always seemed bigger, her pile of presents always taller. These little moments piled up like stones in my pocket, weighing me down day after day. When Ashley got her ears pierced at 6, I wasn't even asked if I wanted mine done too. When she started taking ballet lessons, I was told we couldn't afford 2 sets of lessons. Somehow, though, there was always money for Ashley's growing list of activities: gymnastics, piano, art classes. Our early childhood photos tell the story better than I ever could. In every family picture, Ashley's front and center, usually in some frilly dress from an expensive children's boutique. I'm always somewhere in the background, wearing whatever was on clearance at Target, looking like an afterthought in my own family portraits. Maybe they just don't see it, I remember telling myself at night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on our shared bedroom ceiling. Ashley had twice as many stars on her side of the room. Even the universe above our beds played favorites. The worst part wasn't the material differences. Kids can survive without designer clothes and fancy toys. It was the way they looked at her versus how they looked at me. When Ashley spoke, they leaned in, hanging on every word. When I spoke, their eyes would drift, their attention already moving on to something else, someone else. Always to Ashley. As we approached school age, I held on to hope that things would change. Maybe once we were in school, once teachers and other adults were involved, our parents would see us both equally. Maybe they'd realize that having twins wasn't a burden but a blessing. Maybe they'd finally see me. I remember standing in front of our house that first morning, Ashley and I in our new uniforms, Mom taking pictures. For once, we looked identical, same plaid skirt, same white blouse, same navy cardigan. I thought maybe this was the beginning of change. Girls, smile. Mom called out, but her eyes were fixed on Ashley. Ashley, honey, tilt your head a little to the right. Perfect. The familiar ache in my chest returned. Even in identical clothes, she found ways to make Ashley shine brighter. Our classroom was bright and cheerful, with alphabet charts on the walls and tiny desks arranged in neat rows. Mrs. Thompson, our teacher, sat us alphabetically, Matthews and Matthews, side by side. I was thrilled. Finally, someone who would treat us the same. But after school, the old patterns emerged stronger than ever. Mom's silver SUV would pull up to the curb, and what happened next became a daily routine that felt like a twist of the knife. Audrey, go straight home and start your homework, Mom would say, barely looking at me as I climbed out of the car. Then she'd turn to Ashley with a bright smile. Ready for dance class, sweetheart? Off they'd go, to ballet on Mondays, piano on Tuesdays, art class on Wednesdays, gymnastics on Thursdays, and drama club on Fridays. I'd watch them drive away, then walk into our empty house, the silence my only companion. I threw myself into my studies, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if I got perfect grades, they'd notice me. I'd sit at the kitchen table, methodically working through math problems, practicing my spelling words, reading ahead in our textbooks. The house would stay quiet for hours, until I'd hear the garage door open and their voices floating in, Ashley chattering about her latest achievement, Mom's proud responses echoing through the halls. Mom, I got an A+ on my history test, I said one evening, holding up my paper. That's nice, dear, she replied distractedly, helping Ashley unpack her dance bag. Ashley, show Dad the new routine you learned today. I kept trying. Every perfect score, every teacher's praise, every gold star, I collected them like precious gems, hoping one day they'd be enough to make my parents' eyes light up the way they did for Ashley. Then came the night that changed everything. I was 12, heading to the kitchen for a glass of water after finishing my homework. Their voices drifted up from the den, where they often sat after Ashley went to bed. I normally ignored their late-night conversations, but something made me stop this time. Sometimes I wonder if we made a mistake, Dad was saying, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. What do you mean? Mom asked. Having twins. Ashley would have been enough. She's everything we could want in a daughter. But two of them. I know what you mean, Mom sighed. Ashley's special. She's meant for great things. But Audrey, she's just there. We would have been fine with just Ashley. The glass slipped from my hand, but I caught it before it could shatter. I wished I could catch my heart just as easily. In that moment, everything crystallized. The years of trying to earn their love, of hoping things would change, it all seemed so foolish now. They didn't want me. They never had. I was the unwanted twin, the extra daughter, the one they wished they didn't have. After that night, something shifted inside me. I stopped seeking approval and instead focused entirely on my studies. Turns out, freedom from constantly trying to please my parents cleared my mind in ways I never expected. My grades, already good, became exceptional. Excellent analysis, Audrey, Mr. Peterson said one day in English class, holding up my essay on The Great Gatsby. Class, this is exactly the kind of deep thinking I'm looking for. I could feel Ashley tensing up beside me, her pencil tapping against her desk in that aggressive way it did when she was angry. I kept my eyes forward, but I could see her face turning red from the corner of my eye. Similar scenes played out in other classes. Math, science, history, it didn't matter. The more the teachers praised my work, the more Ashley seethed. It came to a head in chemistry when Mrs. Rodriguez asked me to tutor other students. That evening, I heard Ashley's voice from downstairs, Mom, the teachers are being mean to me. They always praise Audrey and make me look bad. They're doing it on purpose. The next day, Mom stormed into school, designer handbag swinging, heels clicking against the linoleum floors. I watched from the hallway as she marched into Principal Williams' office, where they'd called in Mrs. Chen, our class teacher. I want to know why your teachers are discriminating against my daughter, Mom demanded. Mrs. Chen, bless her, stayed calm and professional. Mrs. Matthews, let me show you something. She pulled out our progress logs, laying them side by side. Here are both girls' records. Audrey consistently scores in the top percentile in all subjects. Ashley's grades are. Are you suggesting my Ashley isn't smart? Mom interrupted. Not at all. I'm merely pointing out that Audrey's academic achievements are. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're all biased against Ashley. No amount of evidence could convince her. When she came home that day, I overheard her telling Dad that the teachers were obviously prejudiced against their precious Ashley. By 16, I was tired of asking for pocket money and watching Ashley get hundreds of dollars just for existing. I applied for a job at the Coffee Bean, a cute cafe just a few blocks from our house. It wasn't glamorous work, but I loved the independence it gave me. Plus, my coworkers actually appreciated my presence, a novel experience in my life. Ashley, of course, couldn't let me have even this small victory. Oh my God, you're actually going to be a waitress, she sneered one morning, watching me put on my uniform. That's so common. Mom, can you believe Audrey's going to serve people food? Mom just made a disapproving noise, sliding another $100 bill across the table to Ashley for her shopping needs. That's when I remembered something I'd overheard years ago, a heated phone conversation where Mom had yelled, "I don't want anything to do with you anymore. You're embarrassing with your tiny house and your budget clothes. I've moved up in the world." She'd been talking to her parents, my grandparents. The ones I'd never met because they weren't good enough for her new lifestyle. That evening, while Mom and Ashley were at another shopping spree, I snuck into Mom's home office. In her address book, under D4, Do Not Contact, I found an address in the older part of town. The next day, instead of heading to my afternoon shift at the cafe, I took a bus to a small blue house with a well-tended garden. My heart was pounding as I walked up the path. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew I had to try. I raised my hand to knock on the door. The door opened, revealing an elderly couple. The woman had gray hair tied back in a neat bun, and the man wore wire-rimmed glasses. They looked at me with confusion until I spoke. "Hi, I'm Audrey Matthews. I think you're my grandparents." Their jaws dropped simultaneously. The woman, my grandmother, put her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God, Frank, it's really her." They invited me in, and suddenly I was sitting in their cozy living room, drinking tea from delicate cups while they couldn't stop staring at me. "You look just like your mother did at your age," Grandma said softly. Before she changed. That first visit turned into many more. I'd tell my parents I was working extra shifts at the cafe, but instead, I'd spend hours with my grandparents, bringing them pastries and cookies from work. They were wonderful listeners, genuinely interested in my life, my studies, my dreams. For the first time, I felt seen. Then came graduation day. The ceremony was typically Matthew's family style, all focus on Ashley. When they called my name as valedictorian, my parents barely clapped, but when Ashley walked across the stage, they hooped and hollered like she'd just won an Olympic medal. I should have been prepared for what came the next day, but somehow, they still managed to shock me. "Girls, we have exciting news," Mom announced at breakfast, practically bouncing in her seat. "We're celebrating graduation in Hawaii." My heart lifted for a moment. Despite everything, I thought maybe, just maybe, this one time. "Honey," Mom turned to me, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "we only got 3 tickets, for us and Ashley. You understand, right? Someone needs to watch the house, and you have your job at the cafe." Ashley didn't even try to hide her smirk as she stirred her orange juice. "Don't worry, sis. I'll send you lots of pictures of me living my best life on the beach." The next morning, I watched from our front door as they loaded their expensive luggage into the taxi. Ashley turned back, waving with exaggerated enthusiasm. "I'll make sure to send you beautiful photos from Hawaii. You can look at them between serving tables." As soon as the taxi disappeared around the corner, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called my grandparents. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over when I heard Grandma's voice. They went to Hawaii without me, I managed to get out between sobs. They just left me here like I'm nothing. Oh, sweetheart, Grandma's voice was soft but firm. Come over right now. We'll have our own graduation celebration. I drove to their house, still wiping away tears. As I turned onto their street, I noticed something unusual, a brand new Mercedes C-Class sedan parked in their driveway, gleaming in the summer sun. It looked completely out of place next to their modest home. Whose car is that? I asked as I walked up to their front porch. Grandpa's eyes twinkled as he held up a set of keys. Yours. Happy graduation, Audrey. I stood there, mouth open, sure I'd misheard him. What? But how? I thought. Sit down, dear, Grandma patted the porch swing. We have something to tell you. They explained how, after Mom cut ties with them, they'd invested their modest savings in several tech startups. Those investments had paid off spectacularly, but they'd chosen to keep living simply in their familiar home. Your mother left us because she thought we were too poor, too beneath her, Grandpa said, shaking his head. The irony is, we're probably wealthier than she is now. We just don't feel the need to show it off. We've been waiting for the right moment to help you, Grandma added. And this seemed perfect. I hugged them both, overwhelmed by their generosity and love. They ushered me inside, where they'd prepared a beautiful graduation lunch. The table was set with their best china, and a congratulations graduate banner hung across the dining room. Over homemade lasagna and garlic bread, they asked about my college plans. Actually, I said, feeling proud, I got accepted to Princeton with a full academic scholarship. I start in the fall. Their faces lit up with genuine joy, so different from my parents' lukewarm reaction when I'd told them. That's wonderful, Grandma exclaimed. But what about housing? The scholarship covers that? Well, I was planning to live in the dorms. Nonsense, Grandpa cut in. We'll get you a nice apartment near campus. Something safe and comfortable where you can focus on your studies. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Ashley, sending a photo of herself lounging on a Hawaiian beach, captioned, "Wish you were here, not." I looked at the message, then at my grandparents' loving faces, then at the keys to my new car sitting next to my plate. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the lesser twin. 2 weeks crawled by. I spent my days working at the cafe, visiting my grandparents, and preparing for college. Each evening, my phone would buzz with another notification, Ashley posing on different beaches, dining at expensive restaurants, or lounging by infinity pools. Each photo was accompanied by increasingly obnoxious captions, living my best life while someone serves coffee. This is what success looks like. Some people vacation in Hawaii, others just dream about it. Then came the day of their return. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book while watching through the window. The taxi pulled up, and I couldn't help but smile as I saw their reactions unfold in slow motion. Mom noticed it first. She stopped so abruptly that Ashley walked right into her, dropping her designer beach bag onto the concrete driveway. Dad, struggling with their expensive matching luggage set, nearly tripped over them both. What is that? Mom's voice carried through the front window, high-pitched and sharp. She was pointing at the Mercedes as if it might bite her, her perfectly manicured finger trembling slightly. Is that a new C-Class? Dad stammered, his jaw hanging open. The latest model? I took my time walking to the front door, enjoying every second of their confusion. Their tan seemed to pale with each step I took. When I stepped onto the porch, they all turned to stare at me like they were seeing a ghost. Whose car is that? Dad demanded, his face red from both the Hawaiian sun and shock. I twirled the keys around my finger, the way Ashley always did with her designer purse straps when she was showing off. Mine. Ashley let out a bark of laughter, but I could hear the uncertainty in it. Yeah, right. Like you could afford that on your waitress salary. What did you do, steal it? Rob the cafe? Or are you just parking it for some rich customer? Actually, I said, savoring each word like the expensive chocolates they'd never shared with me, it was a graduation gift. From Grandma and Grandpa. The color drained from Mom's tanned face so fast I thought she might faint. What? You know, your parents? The ones you were too embarrassed to talk to because they were too poor? Those grandparents. Dad turned to Mom so fast I thought he might get whiplash. Linda, call your parents. Right now. His voice had that same demanding tone he used when ordering at restaurants. Mom's hand shook as she pulled out her phone, her French manicure catching the sunlight. She didn't even bother with pleasantries when Grandma answered, putting the phone on speaker without realizing it. Where did you get the money for that car? She demanded, her voice echoing in our front yard. I could hear Grandma's voice through the phone, calm and slightly amused. Oh, hello to you too, dear. Enjoying your expensive vacation? I saw all the lovely photos Ashley posted. The Royal Hawaiian Hotel looks lovely this time of year. Don't change the subject. How could you afford to buy Audrey a Mercedes? Well, sweetheart, Grandma's voice dripped with satisfaction, it seems you underestimated us. Those embarrassing parents you were so ashamed of? We're quite comfortable now. More than comfortable, actually. We're rich. Mom's entire demeanor changed instantly, her voice becoming syrupy sweet. Mom, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we put the past behind us. Family is so important, after all. Is it? Grandma's voice was cool. Of course. And speaking of family, Mom's eyes darted to Ashley, who was already preening. You have another granddaughter who would love to get to know you. She could really use a nice car too, maybe even something a little more special? Grandpa's laugh crackled through the speaker. You mean the granddaughter you just took to Hawaii while leaving Audrey alone? That granddaughter? Mom's face flushed. That's not. I mean, look, as grandparents, you should treat the girls equally. They're the same age, after all. It's only fair they get the same gifts. Equally? Grandma's voice turned sharp. That's rich coming from you, Linda. Parents should love their children equally too. But that hasn't been the case in your household, has it? The line went dead. Mom stared at her phone for a moment before turning to me, her expression hardening. Audrey, you need to give that car to your sister. Excuse me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ashley needs a good car for college, Dad jumped in. She got accepted to State University. She needs reliable transportation. You're just working at that cafe, you don't need anything this fancy. Ashley was already walking toward the Mercedes, hand outstretched. Give me the keys, sis. You know, I'll look better driving it anyway. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sheer audacity of it all was just too much. This is my car, I said firmly. And I'm not giving it to anyone. Dad stepped forward, his face red with anger. If you don't give that car to your sister right now, you can get out of this house. Funny you should say that, I said, walking to the Mercedes. I popped the trunk, revealing my packed suitcases and boxes. I'd been ready to leave for days. Their mouths hung open as I pulled an envelope from my purse and held it up. Oh, and by the way, I won't be serving coffee much longer. I got accepted to Princeton on a full scholarship. Ashley's shriek could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Mom stumbled backward like I'd slapped her. Dad just stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. I got into my car, the leather seats still new enough to creak slightly. Through the windshield, I could see their shocked faces, their perfect family fantasy crumbling before their eyes. Those last few weeks of summer at my grandparents' house were the happiest I'd ever experienced. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of Grandma's coffee and the sound of Grandpa humming as he read the newspaper. No walking on eggshells, no competing for attention, no feeling like an unwanted shadow. Just peace. Moving to Princeton was bittersweet. I hugged my grandparents goodbye, promising to call every day, and set off in my Mercedes with everything I owned. The drive to New Jersey felt like crossing a boundary between my old life and my new one. My grandparents had found me a beautiful little apartment just 10 minutes from campus. Nothing flashy, but worlds better than any dorm room, hardwood floors, big windows, and even a small balcony where I could study. They'd insisted on paying the rent, despite my protests. I still wanted some independence, though, so I got a part-time job at a local coffee shop. The irony wasn't lost on me, still serving coffee, but this time by choice, not necessity. My co-workers were mostly other students, and for the first time in my life, I found myself making real friends. One Sunday afternoon, about a month into the semester, Grandma called with some interesting news. "Your parents showed up at our door yesterday," she said. My heart skipped a beat. What did they want? Oh, the usual. Linda was all smiles and fake apologies, asking about our financial situation and hinting about Ashley's upcoming birthday. "Your father kept looking around the house, probably trying to guess our net worth." "What did you tell them?" Grandpa's voice joined in on the line. "We told them that we'd already decided what to do with our money. It's all going to you." I could picture their faces. How did they take that? Let's just say Linda's smile didn't look so genuine after that. Grandma chuckled. "We asked them not to come back." That evening, I blocked their numbers and all their social media accounts. Ashley's too. I knew what would come next: sudden declarations of love and regret, offers to start fresh as a family. But I didn't need their kind of family anymore. Now, sitting in my constitutional law class, taking notes and actually enjoying the complexity of the material, I sometimes think about that little girl who used to pray for her parents' love. I wish I could tell her that she'd find something better, not just love, but respect, support, and the freedom to be herself. My phone buzzes quietly in my pocket, probably my study group confirming our meeting at the library later. Or maybe it's Jake, that cute guy from my psychology class who keeps asking to get coffee, not at my cafe, thankfully. It's such a normal life. No drama, no constant comparisons, no feeling like I'm not enough. Just me, my studies, my friends, and my future stretching out ahead of me, full of possibilities. My name is Carol, and I'm 22 years old. I just graduated from college, and I've got a story to tell you about my house. Well, technically, my mother's house. Or it was, until she passed away from intestinal cancer 4 years ago and left it to me. Mom was always the planning type. Even before the cancer diagnosis, she made sure everything was in order. The house was hers free and clear. She'd bought it before she even met my dad, and thank God for that foresight. She made sure I knew about the will, too. "This way you'll always have a home," she told me, her voice steady, despite everything she was going through. Things weren't always this complicated. My parents' marriage lasted 10 years before Dad decided to leave us for another woman. I was 9 when he packed his bags. No drama, no fighting over custody or property, he just left. The only thing he agreed to was paying for my college education. He set up a special account and transferred the entire sum for my future studies right away. I guess that was his version of child support. Dad started a new family pretty quickly. His wife Linda had their daughter shortly after. She's 10 years younger than me. I'd visit sometimes, staying at their rented house, but it never felt right. Linda would be busy with my half-sister, cooing over her latest accomplishment or fixing her hair. Dad was always working, claiming he needed to provide for his family. Funny how I wasn't really included in that category anymore. "Carol, would you like to join us for dinner?" Linda would ask, but her tone always suggested she hoped I'd decline. We kept things cordial though, exchanging birthday cards, holiday greetings, the occasional forced family dinner. It was all very proper and polite, in that uncomfortable way that makes your skin crawl. Mom made good money as a senior accountant, so when the cancer hit, she could focus entirely on treatment. I was 14 when we got the diagnosis. She quit her job immediately to focus on fighting the disease. For 4 years, we lived between hospital visits and treatment sessions. Mom never complained, not once. She just kept fighting, kept planning, kept making sure I would be okay. But cancer doesn't care about plans. I was 18 when she died, just weeks before I was supposed to leave for college in another state. The grief hit me hard, I could barely function. That's when Dad surprised me by actually stepping up. He, Linda, and my half-sister moved in temporarily to help me cope with the loss. I was too numb to question it at the time, too grateful for any support I could get. "We'll help you through this," Dad said, putting his arm around my shoulders. Linda nodded along, trying to look sympathetic while my half-sister explored what was now my house. By the end of summer, I was faced with a dilemma. College was starting in a few weeks, and I had no idea what to do with Mom's house, my house now. I couldn't bear the thought of selling it, but leaving it empty for 4 years didn't seem smart either. That's when Dad came up with his proposal over breakfast one morning. "Carol," he said, pushing his coffee mug aside, "I've been thinking. What if we stayed here? We'd pay all the bills, maintain the place. You wouldn't have to worry about anything while you're at school." I looked at Linda, who was making pancakes at the stove. She turned around and smiled. "It would be good for all of us," she added. "Sophie's already enrolled in the local school, and the house would be well taken care of." It made sense. During the 2 months they'd been staying with me, things had been surprisingly okay. Linda had stopped being so distant, and Sophie, my half-sister, had actually started treating me like a real sister instead of some stranger who showed up occasionally. So I agreed. Looking back, it seemed like the perfect solution. I packed up Mom's personal things, keeping what I wanted and storing the rest in the attic. I left for college feeling confident about my decision. Over the next 4 years, I came home during holidays and summer breaks. Those visits were nice, actually. Linda would cook these big welcome home dinners. "I made your favorite lasagna," she'd say, as if she'd always known my favorites. Sophie would drag me to her room to show me her latest artwork or tell me about school drama. During Christmas breaks, we'd all decorate the tree together. Dad would lift Sophie to put the star on top, while Linda and I argued good-naturedly about whether tinsel was tacky or classic. We'd sit around drinking hot chocolate, and sometimes I could almost forget that this wasn't the family I started with. Summer visits were different, longer, more relaxed. Sophie and I would spend afternoons by the community pool, and I'd help her with her summer reading. Linda would invite me to her book club meetings, and we'd actually have fun dissecting whatever romance novel they'd chosen that month. "Your sister's so good with Sophie," I overheard Linda telling Dad one evening. "It's nice having her home." That made me feel warm inside, like maybe we really had become a proper family. I called regularly during semesters, weekly chats with Dad about my classes, catching up with Linda about house maintenance, the roses you planted are blooming beautifully, Carol, and FaceTime sessions with Sophie, who kept me updated on her middle school adventures. Everything seemed perfect. We'd created this strange but functional family dynamic, built on the foundation of my mother's house. I never imagined it could all fall apart so quickly, but I guess that's the thing about houses. No matter how solid the foundation, you never know what's going on behind the walls. Finally, at 22, with my degree in hand and a job lined up back home, I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. I'd already accepted a position at Marshall & Brooks Financial in my hometown. They'd interviewed me via Zoom and offered me the job right away. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Or so I thought. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house on a sunny June afternoon. I stood there for a moment, taking in the familiar sight. Mom's rose bushes were in full bloom, though they looked different from how she used to maintain them. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and new curtains hung in the windows. Little changes that had happened while I was away at college. Wheeling my suitcases up the front walk, I reached for my keys with a smile, already imagining sleeping in my old room tonight. But when I tried to unlock the door, something was wrong. The key wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired from the journey, but no, the key definitely didn't fit. What the hell? I muttered, trying the key again before finally giving up and knocking on the door, loudly, since it was the middle of the day and they might be watching TV. Linda opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. She was wearing an apron and had flour on her hands, like she'd been baking. "Carol, what are you doing here?" I wheeled my suitcase inside, noticing Dad and Sophie in the living room, both looking equally startled by my appearance. Sophie was sprawled on the couch with her phone, while Dad sat in his favorite armchair, Mom's old armchair, actually reading something on his tablet. "What do you mean? I live here," I said, looking around at what seemed like subtle changes to the living room decor. "Why were the locks changed?" Dad scratched his neck, that nervous habit he's had since forever. "Oh, that. Yeah, I changed them last month. For safety, you know. There were some break-ins in the neighborhood." "You could have told me," I said, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "Or sent me a new key. I mean, this is my house." "We weren't expecting you," Linda said carefully, her arms crossed over her chest. She'd wiped the flour off her hands and was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Why not? I graduated last week. I told you guys I was coming home to start my new job." I looked between them, feeling increasingly uneasy. Something was off about their reactions. Sophie had even put down her phone and was watching the scene unfold with an odd expression. "Carol," Dad cut in suddenly, standing up. "Can we talk in the office for a minute?" I followed him into Mom's old office, my office now, technically. The room still had Mom's degrees on the wall, her collection of financial reference books on the shelves. He closed the door behind us, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he turned to face me. "Listen, honey," he started, his voice low. "There's something you need to know. Linda, well, she thinks this house belongs to me." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What?" "I told her it was my house," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "That I gave it to your mother and you out of kindness after the divorce, and that after your mom passed, it reverted to me. She thinks you've just been living here because I allowed it." I must have stood there gaping at Dad for a full minute before finding my voice again. My first instinct was to storm out of the office and tell Linda everything. Now I understood her surprised look when I showed up. In her mind, I was just some freeloader trying to crash in their house. "I have to tell her the truth," I said, moving toward the door, but Dad caught my arm. "Please, Carol," he begged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just give me a little time. I'll find us a new place to live, I promise. I just need to figure out how to tell her without destroying our marriage." "Destroying your marriage?" I hissed. "What about what you're doing to me?" He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, holding them out like a peace offering. "These are for the new locks. Please, sweetheart. Just a few weeks, that's all I'm asking. Let me handle this my way." I took the keys, feeling sick to my stomach. "Fine," I said finally. "But this is insane, Dad. You know that, right?" He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, honey. I'll make this right, I promise." But things started going downhill immediately. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Linda kept shooting me these looks across the table, all her previous warmth gone. The woman who used to bake my favorite cookies and invite me to book club now acted like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. "More potatoes, Dad?" Sophie asked, completely oblivious to the tension. "Would anyone mind if I redecorated the living room?" Linda asked suddenly, not looking at me. "The current setup is a bit dated." I gripped my fork tighter, knowing she was talking about Mom's furniture arrangement. Dad coughed awkwardly and changed the subject. The next morning, I was making coffee when Linda cornered me in the kitchen. She was still in her robe, hair uncombed, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Carol," she said, leaning against the counter. "I think we need to talk about your plans." "My plans?" "Yes. When are you planning to look for your own place?" She asked it casually, like she was asking about the weather. Now that you have a job lined up, you should start thinking about moving out. You're a grown woman now, after all. I took a slow sip of coffee, counting to 10 in my head. Actually, I've talked to Dad about staying here for now. He's fine with it. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she just turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and a growing sense of dread about how this was all going to play out. The next 2 weeks were like living in a hostile environment. Linda's attitude shifted from cold to downright passive-aggressive. She'd accidentally wash my clothes with colors that would bleed, claiming she forgot which laundry basket was mine. She'd cook family dinners, but conveniently make just enough for 3 people, acting surprised when I came to the table. When I tried to watch TV in the living room, she'd suddenly need to vacuum right there. If I was using the kitchen to make breakfast, she'd barge in and start reorganizing the cabinets, muttering about how some people never learn to keep things tidy. She even moved my mother's favorite vase from its spot on the mantel to some corner shelf, claiming it didn't match her new decorating vision. The worst part was watching Sophie follow her mother's lead. My half-sister, who just weeks ago had been sending me memes and calling me for advice about boys, now rolled her eyes whenever I entered a room. She started calling me that girl when talking about me to her friends on the phone, loud enough for me to hear. Despite the tension at home, my professional life was taking off. I visited Marshall and Brooks Financial, where they showed me my future workspace, a nice corner desk with a view of downtown. My future colleagues seemed friendly and welcoming, especially Sarah from the risk assessment team, who offered to take me to lunch. "When do you start?" she asked over sandwiches. 2 weeks, I replied. Just enough time to settle in at home. That evening at dinner, I shared my start date with the family, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. "They showed me my office today. I start in 2 weeks. Linda's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down with exaggerated care. "Well, isn't that wonderful? Once you get your first paycheck, you can start looking for your own apartment. I know of some nice complexes across town, very affordable for young professionals." I caught Dad's pleading look across the table. His eyes seemed to beg me to keep quiet, to maintain his lie just a little longer. I stabbed at my peas and said nothing. To avoid the tension at home, I started reconnecting with old high school friends. Katie and Jessica were still in town, and we'd meet for coffee or shopping trips, falling back into our old rhythms as if no time had passed. But coming home was always uncomfortable. I'd walk in and hear hushed conversations from the kitchen or living room that would stop abruptly when I appeared. Dad and Linda would spring apart like guilty teenagers, papers would be hastily shoved into drawers, and fake smiles would plaster themselves across their faces. Saturday morning, I woke up to an unusually quiet house. No sound of Linda's weekend meal prep in the kitchen, no Sophie's music blasting from her room, no Dad watching sports on TV. The silence felt wrong somehow, like the calm before a storm. I padded downstairs in my pajamas, checking each room as I went. The kitchen was spotless, not just clean, but unused since the night before. The living room was empty, the throw pillows perfectly arranged on the couch. Sophie's boots, usually cluttering the entryway, were gone. Even Dad's car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone, no messages, no notes about where everyone had gone. My first thought was that maybe they'd gone out for breakfast, but something felt off. They never went out for breakfast without at least leaving a note. Even during these tense weeks, they'd maintained that basic courtesy. I tried calling Dad first, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Weird. I tried a few more times with the same result, that automated voice telling me the person I was trying to reach was unavailable. A knot started forming in my stomach. Finally, I called Linda. She picked up on the 4th ring, just as I was about to hang up. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, hostile in a way I'd never heard before. In the background, I could hear waves and what sounded like tropical music. "I just wanted to know where everyone is," I said, caught off guard by her tone. I woke up and the house was empty. She laughed, an ugly, mean sound that made my stomach clench. Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. First-class flights, luxury resort, the works. We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along and expecting us to pay for you too. Not that you'd know anything about paying for things yourself. What? I wouldn't. Save it, she cut me off. I'm sick of this whole situation. You're nothing but a lazy freeloader, living in our house like you own the place. Your father might put up with it, but I'm done. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities? My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my mother's chairs, actually, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. Linda, No, you listen to me, she snarled. Your father never loved you, you were just an obligation. He already wasted enough money on your college education, and now you're squatting in our house like some entitled princess. Well, I've had enough. Did you think you could just live here forever? Mooching off us while we work hard to maintain this home? I could hear Sophie giggling in the background, and Dad's muffled voice saying something I couldn't make out. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. When we get back, she continued, her voice dripping with venom, I want you gone. Do you understand me? Pack your things and get out of our house. If you're still there when we return, I'll throw you out myself. And trust me, I won't be gentle about it. I don't care where you go, live on the street for all I care. You're not our problem anymore. And don't bother trying to call your father. He agrees with me, he's just too weak to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Carol. Or don't. I really couldn't care less. The line went dead. I sat in that kitchen for what felt like hours, fury slowly replacing shock. They were living in my house, the house my mother had worked for, had left to me, and they had the nerve to call me a freeloader? To try to throw me out? Well, I'd had enough of playing along with Dad's lies. I blocked their numbers on my phone, my hands still shaking, but now with anger rather than hurt. Then I started methodically going through the house, gathering their belongings. Linda's expensive clothes, Sophie's school stuff, Dad's golf clubs, everything went into boxes and suitcases. I worked through the entire Saturday, fueled by rage and bitter disappointment. By Sunday morning, I had their life packed up and stacked in the garage. I found a 24-hour locksmith who could come right away. He worked quickly, replacing the locks on all the doors. It cost a small fortune, but it was worth every penny. When he finished, I handed him my credit card, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I clutched the new keys. Monday morning, I started my new job at Marshall & Brooks. For 2 weeks, I threw myself into work, learning the ropes, making new friends, trying not to think about the confrontation I knew was coming. I kept their stuff in the garage, but I rearranged the house back to how Mom had it, removing every trace of Linda's decorating vision. Then came that Friday. I pulled into the driveway after work to find them standing there, Dad looking nervous, Linda red-faced with fury, and Sophie hanging back with a scowl. They must have just gotten back from their vacation, their suitcases were still in their rental car. Linda started screaming before I even got out of my car. How dare you change our locks? How dare you lock us out of our own house? I walked calmly past them to unlock the door. Linda followed, still yelling. We're calling the police. This is breaking and entering. This is our house. I turned to face them, something inside me finally snapping. No, Linda, it's not your house. It never was. This house belongs to me. My mother bought it before she even met Dad. She left it to me in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it, temporarily. Linda laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. She looked at Dad. Tell her she's lying. Tell her this is our house. Dad wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He just shrugged, his shoulders slumping. She's telling the truth. The house, it was always hers. I watched as the truth sank in, as Linda's face transformed from rage to calculation in a matter of seconds. Her entire demeanor changed, like a switch had been flipped. "Oh, Carol, sweetheart," she said, forcing a laugh. "You didn't think I was serious on the phone, did you? I was just joking. You know how I can get sometimes. All that sun and those tropical cocktails went to my head." "Stop it," I said quietly, but she kept going. "We're family. Remember all those nice times we had? The book club meetings, the holiday dinners? We can have that again." She took a step toward me, arms outstretched like she was going to hug me. Dad jumped in then, his voice thick with emotion. "Princess, I'm so sorry. I know I handled this all wrong, but I love you. You're my daughter. Please, can't we work this out?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The father who left when I was 9. Who paid for my education but missed my life. Who lied about my house, my inheritance, my mother's legacy. Work what out, Dad? The fact that you lied to your wife about owning my house? Or the fact that you stood by while she planned to throw me out of it? Linda turned back to me with that fake smile. "Carol, let's be reasonable. We can all live here together. We'll pay rent." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave." That's when Linda's mask cracked again. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, you'd throw your own family out on the street?" I felt oddly calm as I replied, "You just spent what, $10,000 on a luxury vacation you deliberately hid from me? Pretty sure you can afford an apartment." "Carol, please," Dad tried again, reaching for my arm. "I know I messed up, but..." "No," I cut him off. "You didn't mess up, you lied. 4 years. You let your wife believe she owned my mother's house. You watched her try to redecorate it, rearrange it, erase every trace of Mom. And when she planned to throw me out, you said nothing." "I was going to tell her the truth," he protested. "When? After I was gone? After she'd finished making my house her home?" I shook my head. "I'm done. Get your things and get out." I walked inside and closed the door, ignoring Linda's screams about ingratitude and cruelty. Through the window, I watched them loading boxes from the garage into their rental car. Linda was still yelling, her face red with fury. Sophie was crying. Dad just looked defeated. It took them 3 trips to get everything. As they loaded the last box, Dad tried one more time, knocking on the door. I didn't open it. They finally left as the sun was setting. The next day, Dad tried calling from a new number. "Carol, please," he begged. "We can fix this." "No, Dad, we can't," I said. "Linda made it very clear how you all really feel about me. A freeloader? An obligation? Someone you never loved?" Maybe those were her words, but your silence said enough. That was 2 months ago. I still live in Mom's house, my house. I've repainted the walls, planted new roses in the garden, made it mine again. Sometimes I think about them, wonder where they ended up. But mostly, I think about Mom, and how she made sure I'd always have a home, no matter what. Dad still tries to call sometimes, from different numbers. I don't pick up anymore. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. The funny thing is, I'm happier now. My job is going well, I've made new friends at work, and for the first time since Mom died, I feel at peace in this house. Sometimes healing means letting go, of people, of lies, of the fairy tale of family you wanted to believe in.